One British acting legend married his co-star. After already telling her he was gay, she said yes anyway. Their marriage lasted over 30 years. Why did she stay, and what was really going on behind closed doors? Stick around, his story is coming up. These are the old British actors who kept their spouses secret. Let's dive in. Margaret Rutherford. Margaret Rutherford remains one of Britain's most cherished character actresses, famed for her roles as Miss Marple and Madame Arcady in Blithe Spirit. Her eccentric performances were so vivid that audiences assumed they reflected her true self. She won an Academy Award for the VIPs in 1963 and was adored as a figure of quintessentially English charm. Yet behind the warmth of her public image lay a more turbulent private life. Rutherford carried the shadow of family tragedy. Her father had committed murder and died in a psychiatric institution, an inherited burden she bore with quiet resilience. In 1945, she married actor Stringer Davis, a partnership celebrated publicly but deeply private in its emotional complexity. Davis's own personal struggles were largely unknown, yet their bond endured, defined by mutual support and devotion. Rutherford fiercely protected their relationship, valuing intimacy over public scrutiny. When she received her Academy Award, she dedicated it to Davis with profound sincerity, revealing a tenderness and humanity that transcended appearances. Stuart Granger became one of Britain's biggest screen idols during the golden age of cinema. With his striking appearance, confident manner, and commanding performances in adventure stories and historical dramas, he built the image of the perfect romantic hero. Audiences admired him as a symbol of courage, charm, and traditional masculinity. Away from the cameras, however, Granger's personal journey was much more complicated than the roles he played. His first marriage to actress Elspeth March began in 1938 and resulted in 2 children before eventually ending. In 1950, he married Hollywood star Gene Simmons, and their relationship attracted significant public attention because both were successful actors. The marriage ended in 1960, and Granger later married Caroline Lasser in 1964. Despite living much of his life in the public eye, Granger worked hard to keep control over his private story. His autobiography Sparks Fly Upward, released in 1981, offered a more open look at his relationships, personal choices, and the challenges behind his famous image. Still, many aspects of his private life remained layered and complicated, showing the difference between the glamorous figure audiences admired and the man beyond the spotlight. Flora Robson. Dame Flora Robson was one of the most respected dramatic performers of 20th century British theatre and film. Celebrated for her intelligence, emotional depth, and powerful character portrayals, she earned admiration from critics, directors, and audiences alike. She was honored as a Dame Commander of the British Empire and received an Academy Award nomination for her outstanding work. Although public records show that Robson never married, her personal life was far richer and more private than that simple description suggests. Unlike many actresses of her era, she avoided creating a public romantic image and kept her relationships away from media attention. She believed her work should speak for itself and rarely allowed interviews to focus on her private affairs. Over the years, Robson formed deep and lasting bonds, particularly within the theater community. Some of these friendships were marked by strong loyalty, companionship, and shared lives, though details remained outside the public eye. The actress carefully protected her personal world, leaving behind a life that historians and biographers continue to examine with respect. What remains clear is that Robson valued privacy, independence, and meaningful connections over public attention. Charles Laughton. Charles Laughton was one of the most remarkable actors Britain ever produced. Known for his extraordinary range, emotional intensity, and unforgettable performances, he earned an Academy Award for The Private Life of Henry VIII and became celebrated worldwide for films such as Witness for the Prosecution and The Night of the Hunter. Behind his celebrated career, however, Lawton carried a deeply private personal reality that remained hidden from the public for many years. In 1929, he married actress Elsa Lanchester, and their relationship appeared to outsiders as a traditional Hollywood romance. The truth was far more complex. Before their marriage, Lawton openly shared his sexuality with Lanchester, and the two chose to build a life together based on understanding, companionship, and mutual respect. Marriage did not follow conventional expectations, yet it endured for more than 3 decades. Lanchester later wrote openly about their relationship in her memoirs, revealing the challenges they faced while also describing the genuine care and affection between them. Lawton passed away in 1962 after battling cancer, leaving behind a legendary artistic legacy. His marriage to Lanchester remained a unique and complicated bond, shaped by love, honesty, and the pressures of living under public scrutiny during a less accepting era. Ralph Richardson. Sir Ralph Richardson remains one of the most respected figures in British acting history. Known as one of the great performers of the 20th century, he built a remarkable reputation through his work on stage and screen. Alongside Laurence Olivier and John Gielgud, he was regarded as one of the leading actors who shaped British theatre during his era. Away from the spotlight, Richardson's personal life was marked by experiences he rarely discussed publicly. His first marriage to actress Muriel Hewitt began in 1924. During their marriage, Hewitt suffered from a serious mental illness, creating a deeply difficult period for both of them. Richardson chose to handle the situation privately, protecting her dignity and keeping the details of their struggles away from public attention. After Hewitt's death in 1942, Richardson married actress Muriel Forbes in 1944. Although his second marriage was more visible, he continued to guard his personal affairs with the same strong sense of privacy that defined much of his life. Richardson avoided discussing family matters in interviews and often redirected personal questions with his familiar charm and quiet humor. What he kept hidden was not a scandal, but a deeply personal story involving love, responsibility, loss, and compassion. His silence was a way of preserving the privacy of those closest to him, allowing his work as an actor to remain the focus of public attention. Dirk Bogarde. Dirk Bogarde became one of Britain's most admired actors during the 1950s and 1960s, with a level of fame that made him a constant presence in fan magazines and newspapers. Thousands of admirers followed his career, many believing the charming screen star was a romantic figure waiting for the perfect partner. Behind the public image, however, Bogarde lived a very different private life. Since 1947, he shared a deep and lasting relationship with his manager and companion, Tony Forwood. Their bond continued for more than 4 decades until Forwood's death in 1988, and remained the most important personal connection in Bogarde's life. At the time, openly revealing such a relationship was extremely risky. In Britain, homosexuality was still illegal, and the entertainment industry expected stars to maintain carefully controlled public images. For Bogarde, honesty could have damaged his career and placed him in legal danger. Even after laws changed in 1967, he chose to keep his personal life private. Through interviews and his memoirs, he shared many details about his experiences, but carefully avoided discussing the relationship that defined his life. For decades, silence became a protective shield around Bogarde's identity. His story reflects the pressures faced by many public figures of his generation, who had to hide important parts of themselves to survive in a less accepting society. Wilfred Hyde-White. Wilfred Hyde-White became one of British cinema's most recognizable character actors, known for portraying charming, sophisticated, and slightly mischievous gentlemen. With his refined voice, polished appearance, and effortless wit, he became a favorite choice for filmmakers in both Britain and Hollywood. He appeared in more than 100 films, including the classic musical My Fair Lady, alongside Rex Harrison and Audrey Hepburn. While audiences saw him as the image of a confident English gentleman, Hyde-White's private life contained struggles that were far less polished. He married actress Blanche Glynn in 1927, and they had a son together. After their marriage ended, he later married Ethel Corcoran in 1957. Throughout these personal changes, Hyde-White remained determined to keep family matters away from public attention. One of the biggest challenges he faced was a serious gambling habit that created significant financial difficulties. Despite these problems, he maintained his public charm and continued working successfully. His second wife, Ethel, understood the situation and helped manage the pressures behind the scenes. Hyde-White valued privacy deeply. Although he enjoyed public recognition and the affection of audiences, he believed his personal struggles belonged only to himself and those closest to him. His life showed a contrast between the cheerful gentleman seen on screen and the more complicated reality away from the spotlight. John Gielgud. Sir John Gielgud was one of the greatest figures in British acting history. During his remarkable 96-year life, he earned a knighthood, an Academy Award, and countless honors that recognized his extraordinary contribution to theater and film. Celebrated for his legendary voice and masterful Shakespearean performances, he became a defining figure of 20th century classical acting. Behind his celebrated career, however, Gielgud lived with the constant pressure of protecting a deeply personal part of his identity. At a time when homosexuality was widely condemned and legally dangerous, he carefully guarded his private life. In 1953, he was arrested in a public scandal related to homosexual activity, an event that threatened to damage the career he had spent decades building. With support from colleagues and the theater community, he managed to continue working, but the experience left a lasting impact on his approach to privacy. Later in life, Gielgud shared a long-term relationship with Martin Hensler, which lasted from the early 1970s until Hensler's death in 1999. Their partnership was more openly acknowledged than many relationships involving men of Gielgud's generation, though public discussions often remained cautious and indirect. After his death in 2000, biographies revealed a fuller picture of his personal journey. They showed a man whose private life was shaped not by shame, but by the pressures of an era that forced many people to hide important parts of themselves. The lives of these British acting legends prove that fame only reveals a small part of a person's story. Behind the awards, applause, and unforgettable performances were private struggles, hidden emotions, and relationships kept away from the spotlight. Their untold stories remind us that every legend had a life beyond the screen.